Well, what can I say? In the last few days, we've talked a lot about Iran's nuclear program. We all saw how Israel went for the jugular of the Iranian regime with one very clear objective: to dismantle its nuclear program and missile system. This time, the Israelis went all out. They bombed hundreds and hundreds of targets in order to decimate the military capabilities of the Persian nation. And in the end, after the US B-2 bombers stepped in, the clash came to an end and a ceasefire was declared. Now, let's see how long it actually lasts, because there are still a lot of questions about how much damage was actually done to Iran's nuclear program. But okay, this whole situation got us thinking. What about Israel? I mean, it's no secret. Well, technically it is, because Israel officially refuses to confirm what basically everyone already knows. They have a small but deadly nuclear arsenal, making them one of the world's most feared players in the game.
Israel owns 80 to 90 nuclear warheads. In September 2018, Director General of Israel Atomic Energy Commission Ziv Sneer said that Tel Aviv would develop and fortify its nuclear facilities in response to Iranian threats.
The Israeli nuclear program is one of the best-kept secrets of the modern era, a mystery that everyone claims to know about, but few dare to point out clearly, because the Israeli government has never officially confirmed nor denied having nuclear weapons. They've always stuck to what's known as a full nuclear ambiguity policy. Of course, even so, they've made one thing very clear. Anyone who threatens to wipe Israel off the map could end up bringing about their own annihilation.
מי שמאיים עלינו בכליה, מעמיד עצמו בסכנה דומה. ובכל מקרה, הוא לא ישיג את מטרתו.
So, like I was saying, here in the team, we started asking a few questions amongst ourselves. What kind of weapons of mass destruction does Israel actually have? How is this program developed? And under what circumstances would Israel actually make use of this threat? Well, let's take a look. But before we continue, let me ask you something. Have you heard of the 14 Eyes Alliance? It's an international agreement between countries like the US, UK, Canada, Germany, and others, allowing their governments to collect and share internet user data with each other. In simple terms, your online activity can be monitored without your knowledge and potentially used against you. So, is there a way to avoid this kind of surveillance? Yes, by using a VPN, but not just any VPN. You need one that's reliable, secure, and based outside the 14 Eyes Alliance. That's where CyberGhost VPN comes in. CyberGhost is the ultimate tool for protecting your privacy online, not just from governments, but also from hackers and cybercriminals. It's headquartered outside the 14 Eyes countries, and unlike many VPNs, it actually keeps no logs of your activity. So just open CyberGhost VPN before you browse, and no one will be able to track your online activity. You get full privacy. It's fast, it's super easy to use, it's trusted by over 38 million users, and has an excellent rating on Trustpilot. Plus, it blocks ads and malware, while still giving you all the classic VPN perks, like bypassing geo-restrictions on streaming platforms or accessing websites blocked by governments. And here's the best part. By using the link in the description, you are getting a special offer. It's just €2.03 a month, and you can connect up to 7 devices. If you share your account with friends or family, that's basically 30 cents per person for full online privacy. That's not bad for less than the price of a coffee, right? If you want to try CyberGhost and support our channel at the same time, we'd really appreciate it. Just use the QR code on the screen or the link in the description, and don't worry, there is a 45-day money-back guarantee. So if it's not for you, no problem. You've got nothing to lose by giving it a shot. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. Israel's nuclear weapons are an extremely sensitive topic when it comes to the country's security, which means that the information available is extremely limited. However, as time goes by, the usual thing happens. Little by little, many details start leaking out, so that today we actually know quite a bit about the true scope of Israel's nuclear capabilities, which is exactly what we're going to tell you about next. Israel's nuclear weapons are an extremely sensitive topic when it comes to the country's security, which means that the information available is extremely limited. However, as time goes by, the usual thing happens. Little by little, many details start leaking out, so that today we actually know quite a bit about the true scope of Israel's nuclear capabilities, which is exactly what we're going to tell you about next. The race for the atom in Tel Aviv started very early, after learning that the United States had developed this weapon right after the country was founded on the 14th of May 1948. Then leader leader, David Ben-Gurion, decided this was exactly what they needed to prevent another hypothetical Holocaust. And everything got underway in the late 1950s, when Israel began building a nuclear reactor in the Negev desert. At that time, a strategic agreement with the French government allowed the transfer of nuclear technology under the promise that it would be destined for peaceful civilian use, although obviously the intention was entirely different. The Dimona nuclear reactor in the Negev desert was designed to produce weapons-grade plutonium, yet for years, Israel claimed that this project was intended to feed a series of desalination plants, with the aim of creating desert crops as a way to overcome the country's shortage of land suitable for agriculture. Yeah, as you can see, when it comes to nuclear weapons, this story is typically full of good intentions and plenty of broken promises. The thing is that Israel is considered to have acquired its first nuclear bomb as early as the late 1960s. And you might think that the United States gave the go-ahead to all of this, but in reality, Israel's nuclear program has always been a bit of a thorn in Washington's side. Why? Because Israel didn't use this technology to develop a peaceful nuclear industry. They used it to do exactly what Iran is trying to do now: build the bomb. And why has this always made Washington uncomfortable? Well, because Israel's nuclear capabilities give it massive strategic autonomy. Unlike countries like Japan, South Korea, Turkey, or even Germany, Israel doesn't need the US nuclear umbrella, which means Jerusalem doesn't always have to follow Washington's lead. They can get involved in all sorts of risky operations without asking for US approval, which is exactly what we have seen with the attack on Iran. Let's just say that Israel sees these weapons as a sort of last resort insurance policy, one that's neither controlled nor supervised by the United States. Now, the White House has never forced a full-blown crisis over this issue, but it has made Israel agree to a few promises. Promises that, for better or worse, they've kept so far. So, what are these commitments? Well, take a look.
In the early 1970s, when the U.S. discovered Israel's nuclear capabilities, President Richard Nixon, advised by Henry Kissinger, figured there was no way to take the bomb away from them. What was done was done. However, Washington set a few ground rules. The Israeli government could never officially acknowledge its nuclear arsenal, nor could it use it as part of any explicit military deterrence narrative. So instead, Israel tacitly recognizes its nuclear weapons by saying it won't be the first country to introduce them into the region, a statement that strongly hints they have them, but also sets a clear limit on when they might be used.
But why did Washington demand so much secrecy around this issue? Well, it's actually pretty simple: to keep Arab countries from having the perfect excuse to launch their own nuclear programs, which in turn could have caused many other countries in the rest of the world to do exactly the same. Let's just say that recognizing that Israel had nukes might have set off a global chain reaction that Washington desperately wanted to avoid. And this is exactly what makes Israel's nuclear arsenal such a rare case, because in many ways, it completely challenges the traditional logic behind nuclear deterrence. Countries like the US, Russia, China, or even North Korea proudly showcase and promote their nuclear capabilities. They talk about it, lay out clear doctrines, run exercises, and they do it for one simple reason: deterrence. That's basically the entire philosophy behind mutually assured destruction. If your enemy knows you have the ability to wipe them out, they will think twice before starting anything, because they know in the end it could be total disaster for both sides. But since Israel can't officially confirm or showcase its nuclear power, and can't even use it as part of its official security strategy, it's stuck in a very peculiar kind of deterrence limbo.
Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu defends Iran nuclear claims in face of criticism. In his interview, Netanyahu repeatedly refused to be drawn on whether Israel had its own nuclear weapons capability, and insisted that he did not seek a military confrontation with Iran.
Either way, those were the conditions Washington imposed on Israel to allow them to keep their nuclear program going. And honestly, the Israelis didn't seem to mind too much, because having a last resort insurance policy is one thing, but provoking your enemies to chase after their own nukes as well is a completely different game. And don't forget, back in the 1970s, Israel didn't just have to worry about Khomeini's Iran. The real problem was the constant clashes with the rest of the Arab world. Take 1973, for example, the Yom Kippur War, when Israel fought against a coalition led by Syria and Egypt, with plenty of backing from countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Libya, Iraq, and others. But how far does Israel's nuclear capability actually go? Well, pay attention. For many, it might seem a bit surprising to see Israel at the very back of the pack when it comes to countries that have officially crossed the nuclear threshold. But roughly speaking, that's the way things stand. Take a look.
Israel's nuclear program has been in development for nearly 70 years, yet its estimated arsenal remains far smaller than that of most nuclear powers. India and Pakistan alone each have roughly twice as many weapons of mass destruction as Israel is currently believed to possess.
Naturally, Israel is a much smaller country with much more limited needs, among other things, because among its direct enemies, not one of them has a nuclear arsenal. So the question is, why does Israel seem to have lagged behind in this field, at least as far as the big numbers are concerned? Well, in theory, there are several matters we have to take into account regarding the size of the Israeli nuclear arsenal. First, the secrecy surrounding the program has made it extremely difficult to purchase materials and obtain key supplies for the manufacture of this type of weapon. Some experts even point out that the Mossad has had to do its part to obtain the necessary resources, although, of course, Israeli innovation has also made a great deal of progress.
For example, in 1973, Israel patented laser isotope separation, a few years before such a practice was common in Western plants. Enriching uranium in this way requires less energy than centrifuges and can also be done in smaller, more discrete facilities. This is crucial considering that Israel has apparently only developed these weapons at its nuclear testing center in the Negev desert, a facility limited in capacity.
That's not all. Although the Israelis were able to assemble some facilities and obtain enough raw materials, they have always had an Achilles heel in this whole story. Because clearly, Mossad might be able to sneak through a ship flying a false flag packed with uranium or operate a ghost flight carrying enrichment equipment, but there's one thing that simply cannot be hidden: a nuclear test. And this is exactly where experts agree on the limits of Israel's program: the lack of effective tests carried out.
Only in 1979 was there an officially recorded nuclear test attributed to Israel, although since it took place in the Indian Ocean. Some sources indicate that it was actually a South African test, and while there are reports of underground tests and a few other smaller-scale exercises, the truth is that Israel has conducted very few tests, and those that did happen were extremely limited.
As you can imagine, this is a pretty big problem. Not only because it puts the brakes on developing better weapons of this type, but also because it has apparently prevented Israel from developing real capabilities. We will see that in more detail in a moment. But before turning to this matter, the truth is that there's also a budgetary limit. As I said, Israel is a relatively small country. It has a little over 9 million inhabitants, and when it developed this program, its population was even smaller, less than 4 million inhabitants. And as you can probably imagine, a program of this type is not exactly cheap. For Israel, it was already a great effort, but logically, this had to have a limit. And for all that, although Israel is a cutting-edge military technology cluster in the West, its real capabilities of mass destruction are far more limited. Of course, 90 nuclear weapons are nothing to scoff at, especially in a region where no neighbor has access to such capabilities at this point in time. And quantity is not everything. So it's time to take a closer look at what these 90 nuclear weapons look like, where they could operate, what their range is, and most importantly, where they are aimed at. Well then, let's dive in.
Does size matter?
Friends, limited resources and the inability to conduct regular tests have led Israel to maintain a tactical arsenal with moderate capabilities. The power of the Israeli state is believed to be concentrated in fission weapons, generally of lower yield compared to the more modern, high-yield thermonuclear weapons. For example, several experts suggest that Israel may possess weapons of up to 100 kilotons, while US or Russian ballistic missiles, for instance, reach around 800 kilotons each. Of course, in a way, these weapons are specifically tailored to Israel's needs, which would essentially require, in a critical moment, to use their existence as a means of deterring its neighbors. And obviously, smaller bombs don't make them any less frightening, particularly because if there's one thing the Israelis know how to do, it's how to make the most effective use of their equipment. In this sense, as far as we know, Netanyahu's red button has 3 deployment platforms, each with different range and firepower. Let's take a look.
Since it relies on lower-yield tactical weapons, Israel has adapted its F-16 and F-15 aircraft to serve as nuclear strike platforms if necessary. These aircraft could achieve effective strikes at ranges between 1,600 kilometers and 4,450 kilometers, allowing them to reach not only Iran, but nearly any other part of the Middle East. It is unclear at this time whether they have already attempted or succeeded in adapting their new F-35s to accomplish this task.
But in any case, that's not where it ends. At sea, Israel has also developed alternatives, which is particularly interesting. Israel operates several Dolphin-class submarines equipped with modified cruise missile launchers capable of carrying nuclear warheads. And finally, we come to the icing on the cake. The Jericho 2 and 3 missiles, which serve as medium-range and intercontinental ballistic missiles, respectively. These missiles can carry more powerful fission warheads, with ranges reaching as far as Europe or India. However, they are less maneuverable and more easily detected, since they are launched from land-based silos. In any case, as you can see, Israel's nuclear capabilities are no joke. Even though the arsenal is not publicly declared, Israel has the ability to launch nuclear strikes by land, sea, and air across the entire region. So, if it ever came to that, preventing an attack would be extremely difficult. This is Israel's great deterrent force. Now then, when would they actually use these capabilities? Well, stay tuned.
Now or never.
VisualPolitik community, every country with nuclear weapons has a doctrine that regulates how and under what circumstances these capabilities can be used. Well, in Israel, this nuclear doctrine is called Samson, and the story of this biblical character itself gives us a very clear idea of Israel's rationale for the use of its nuclear weapons. Take a look. According to a well-known biblical account, Samson was a judge of Israel, famous for his supernatural strength, which came from his hair. It was both his source of power and his greatest weakness. When Samson was shaved by his enemies, he lost his strength, which allowed him to be captured and enslaved. However, as soon as he regained his hair, he sealed his dramatic revenge. In the middle of a ceremony, Samson knocked down the pillars of the temple with his own strength, killing all his enemies, but also losing his life on the spot. So, legend has it that Samson killed more enemies in his death than his entire life. Can you now guess where this is going? The Samson doctrine establishes that Israel can never, under any circumstances, be the first to use nuclear weapons in a conflict. Israeli protocols only contemplate 3 scenarios where they could consider the primary use of nuclear weapons. First, a successful enemy military penetration into urban areas that seriously compromises the continuity of the state of Israel. Second, the total destruction and collapse of its air force. And third, the occurrence of a devastating chemical or biological attack. Outside of these scenarios, Israel cannot activate the use of its nuclear weapons under any circumstances. As I've said, these are fundamentally a kind of last resort insurance. That is, in fact, their true value. Because nuclear weapons are very particular. They possess such immense destructive capacity that the concept of mutual assured destruction was developed around them. The problem, of course, is that for some radical religious groups, these limits could be far more fragile. And also, in such a small country like Israel, using these weapons first could be totally devastating. It might even prevent them from mounting an effective counterattack. That's why Israel cannot, under any circumstances, allow its neighboring countries to acquire such capability. And that's why this technically remains a closely guarded secret, even though the whole world already knows of its existence. But now, it's your turn. What do you think of everything we've shared with you? How does it make you feel? Leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's kick off the debate. And once again, a big thank you to CyberGhost for sponsoring this video. For just €2.03 a month, you get full protection for your data and unrestricted access to blocked content around the world. Remember, you can try it completely risk-free thanks to their 45-day money-back guarantee. And by signing up, you're also helping support our content. And very importantly, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. I've been Josh. Thank you for watching VisualPolitik. See you next time.